And when I left Juilliard, I was interested in all this music, but I was also told that I shouldn't talk to anybody who's playing blues and rock and jazz. Like they're not the high quality people like the classical people. And that only took me until, recently to realize that they were right.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. And coming from an undisclosed location in Australia, and it's obviously a park, is Mr. Paul Bindig and the nearby paddle steamer. How are you, Paul?
There is a paddle steamer blowing its horn. There is a freight train behind me. It's all happening. But I've moved heaven and earth to be here, David, because A, I love your company. B, we have an amazing guest with us today.
We do indeed. So, Mr. Jordan Rudess, most of you out there will well and truly know Jordan's work. We cover quite the bit of ground, and we made a concerted effort because Jordan is so well known and has undertaken a whole bunch of interviews because of his generosity of spirit and the time he provides. So we've tried to go off the beaten track a little bit, but also cover some stuff more broadly as well. So I think you'll enjoy it a great deal. This is the first of two parts, and we'll see you again at the start of part two. Jordan, it's an honour and privilege to have you on the show, sir. How are you this fine Friday night?
I'm doing well. I just had a nice day with some very great keyboard player friends talking shop and history and telling stories. And it was some guys I hadn't seen for a while, but some of my very closest friends kind of from the keyboard industry. So this is an appropriate interview to have after that. It was
That's
really
right.
great.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we'll continue to talk shop for sure. So I did want to kick off over the last week. You did an amazing interview with Rick Beato, and I just wanted to do a bit of a follow-up on the great tech that you were showcasing with your colleague Lancelot around using AI as essentially an amazing jamming tool. But just, if you don't mind, a brief potted, in 100 words or less, what that is, and then I'm just keen to ask you a couple more questions about it.
Sure. So I had an idea about a year and a half ago after thinking a lot about the new kind of technology and tools that are available. Um, I wanted to do something where we used AI, and instead of just like generating audio like a lot of people are doing, I wanted to try to create a real jamming partner for myself, but with my musical brain. So I know that might sound a little self-centered, but the reason that it kind of the idea came out that way is because I started to think about all the kinds of things I think about every time I go over to the keyboard and in every style I play and kind of go through, if you will, these rules that I was thinking in my head. Like when you think about every style that we play, if it's, let's say, blues or something proggy, like an Emerson thing or a Genesis thing, there are things that make those styles sound the way they do. There are things that I would do that you would do to like get that sound out. And then I was thinking, wow, with the tech, we could train it to know all those rules. So kind of like one idea led to another, and my meeting the guys at MIT through the various steps that it took to kind of get in there. It all came together beautifully. And I got connected there with a couple of amazing PhD researchers. One of them, Lancelot, is the audio specialist, and Perry was the kinetic sculpture specialist, and of course Joe Paradiso, who runs the responsive environments group at MIT, which is the group that I was kind of like brought in as a visiting artist. So kind of one step led to another, and this idea that I had really resonated with them, and so we started to train these models. And right now, the way that it all works is that there's separate models that are all trained for different musical headspaces, if you will, to do different musical things. And it's been an amazing journey because this whole idea of being interactive is very powerful, where the model, the computer, is listening to what I do. And based on what I do, it's making a decision to then use the training data that I also gave to my researchers to then train the model. At first, it didn't really work. And I was like, okay, well, this is an idea, and it's not maybe going to work. But I can totally remember the day I walked into the lab, the media labs at MIT, and I was playing around with the model that actually plays melodic lines and leads over the chordings that I do, and it started to work. And I was like, oh my God, turn on your camera. This is unbelievable. And I called my wife, who was there in the hallway working on something else. You got to come in here. Basically calling everybody and saying, this works. It's incredible. So that's kind of like where we're at. We were building what we called a baby at the beginning because it had to be taught to speak to any kind of musical language. And now we basically have a teenager that I was able to bring over to Rick's place and show him. And it was, it's pretty musical. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it still can mess up. There's still times I want to scold it and say, no, don't do that. Maybe that's not cool. Or it maybe hits a cluster out of nowhere. But that's fine because now we know that we're on a path to create something that I think is very exciting and inspiring and meaningful. Like where it's going to go. Everybody always asks, where do you think it's going to go? And I always say, well, you know what? I just get in, I'm somebody who's always kind of in like a very creative space. I get inspired by sound, by technology, bring it to me and I'm going to think of some way to make it artistic. So for me, this is an incredible project just to sink my musicality and my mind into. For the researchers, they're researchers. They're just, oh, let's try some stuff. Let's develop some technology. So that's kind of where it's at. Nothing's a product at this point. We're just kind of cruising down this very, very cool road, and inspiring ourselves. And also it seems to be inspiring a lot of people around us too, with the kind of things that we're doing. And before I stop this running dialogue, I will say that I also work in other areas of AI music that are not the MIT thing, that are more controversial, that also have things about it that's very exciting. But I'm in there kind of involved and helping to steer a little bit where those things are going as well.
And so look, I think you made a good point about your other works as well. So, I mean, we take a lot of interest in AI and music on the show. And I know we've had Thomas Dolby, for example, on the show, who takes a
Cool.
really positive view towards AI as a bit like yourself, as a creative assistant to really drive you to push the boundaries of what you can do personally. So I'm assuming that's your broad philosophy as you work through these things?
Yes, I see it as another tool, but I see it as the most powerful tool that we've been giving, like probably in my whole lifetime. There's been these stages, if you go way back, you have things like the phonograph that really shook things up because all of a sudden people thought they were against it, but people are not going to want to go see live music. You had this thing you could put in your house to listen to music. What's that about? And then let's go major fast forward. And then, we're in the whole place where samplers are being invented and musicians are going, oh my God, I'm going to be out of work, and synthesizers and, people with Broadway pits and everybody. I'm not saying that the people who thought that or think that they're going to lose their jobs don't have a right to feel that way. I have a lot of sympathy for my music friends who are feeling that way. I think it's really a tough situation to be in. But I also think there's no stopping the technology. So I think it's important to, first of all, understand it. Like, what is this? What is it really? It's not just something that's coming in to kill my work load. It's not just taking my job and it's whatever it is. It has some interest to it. It's something that obviously has some kind of value. So to understand it is, I think, a really, really important thing first. And then I think it's, maybe a recommendation to people everywhere is to have some flexibility. Like, like, what can I do? It's not going away. It's right there. Maybe there's something I can do with it. Like, how can it help me? Because what else are you going to do? You're just going to fight it, and you're going to just kind of like get in a really bad headspace, and I mean that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So, but again, I have a lot of love for my fellow musicians and artists, and I get it. I just want to help to make this a really positive, thing that'll inspire and educate and do cool things with.
Yeah, absolutely love it. And just the last question on this subject, Jordan. So, I mean, how confident are you in, say, 5 years that this is still a tool that you'll be able to harness and drive creativity rather than it sort of harnessing us, so to speak?
That's a great question. I think that it's something that's just going to get better and better and become a greater tool, really. If you think of it that way, this tool is going to get like amazing, where people who are in their home studios, they're going to want to use it. Just like they want to use DAW with all the functionality that, you can use these days, things that people hated, step sequencers and all the kind of automatic tools and melodynes and, I mean, let's go back a little bit, arpeggiators and karma on the chord synthesizers, things that were like automatic, but all of a sudden everybody, oh yeah, of course we use this. And of course we use Pro Tools and we just move things around like that, it's just what it is. So this is going to get to a point where who knows what'll happen, like with my technology I'm doing at MIT, for an example. Like this one particular model that I'm working on that I think is would be like the world's greatest ear training program. Like just from an educate, not even talking about like a performance thing, but just like an incredible ear training program. So there's a lot of, when people see it, you go, oh, that could be fill in the blank. That could be so maybe in 5 years it will be those things, and we'll dial it in enough that it will be something that will be that that powerful and great and helpful.
Jordan, I love the way you described your MIT AI project as like an unruly teenager that you're wrangling and you're showing it to Rick Beato, and it still makes a few mistakes, but as a
Yeah.
patient parent, you're proud of the way it's learning and growing. And I think our listeners and viewers, and certainly I would love to know about your younger years as well. So as you were growing up musically, so give us a sense of what it was like for yourself as a young person in your formative years, and then moving through adolescence, and what was the musical experience at home, and how did that inform where you've landed today?
That was a very nice transition, by the way. Very good. Um,
Thank you.
you're hired. Oh, you're already here. Okay, good. Um, yeah, so let me put it this way. So, and in a shorter version than, it could be. I started out with just an interest in the piano. I was in the second grade classroom, and my parents didn't have a piano yet, but I was playing the one at the school. And my mother called one day and told the teacher called my mother one day and said, "Oh, Jordan is playing very nicely in the classroom." And my mother was like, "Well, playing what? Like, what are you talking about?" And she was like, "Well, he's playing the piano." She was like, "Well, we don't have a piano." And the teacher was like, "You should get one because he plays." So she bought a little white SD. It was that was the brand name, SD piano, like a little baby grand, very tiny baby grand, and found a local teacher who would come around every week and like for half an hour and teach me. She got suspicious when the teacher started to come for free, and he threw out the book that was the little red book that everybody learns from. He didn't want to use that with me. Instead, he wrote down like a circle of fifths chord charts and was starting to teach me chords. One day, some friends of my parents came over, and I was playing a song from like a Broadway show that had like the single notes, just so it was like a guitar book, I think, the single notes and chords. And I was playing this song, and this woman, friend of my parents, said, "Well, how are you playing that?" I was like, "Well, how am I playing? What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, you're playing all these notes. That's not anywhere written on the page." I said, "Well, look," I said, "It is written on the page. It has the melody and the chords." And she was, "No, no, no, all the other stuff." I was like, "Doesn't everybody do that?" She told my mother, "You should take this child to a more serious teacher." So at that point, my mother found this woman. Her name was Magda. She was from a Hungarian woman whose son actually had gone to the college level of Juilliard but dropped out to join Guy Lombardo's band. And when Magda met me, she was like, "Okay, you're going to be the one to get into Juilliard, and you're going to stay there." That was her mission. So she trained me for like a year and a half, and like taught me the repertoire that I needed to audition for Juilliard. And so when I was 9, I went and I auditioned for the preparatory division of Juilliard, and I got in. And I had I got a great teacher. Her name was Catherine Parker. She wasn't too happy on the first week when she assigned me the Bach C major prelude. And I took it home and I read the first couple measures, and then I was enjoying improvising on all of that. Because when I came in and played it for her, she was like, wait a minute, you can't, that's not what we do here. You have to learn you have to respect what's on the page. So ended up that while I was studying all my classical music, I was very serious about it. But I would escape to the furthest practice room from my teacher's studio and sometimes bring like some of the other kids. And I'd say, come on, I'll show you like some boogie woogie. I'll play a little bit of blues for you. I'll play this. So I'd have my improvisation way down over there. And then I'd come back and button up my tie or whatever and play and do my classical thing. But I want to jump to something that relates to where you started the transition, which is that when I started to discover, and before that, but when I just started to listen to some of the progressive rock and jazz things that kind of started to influence me, I started to get this mindset where it was like, okay, wow, I'm listening to like Genesis, right? And Genesis, I was realizing that what is making this sound? And I would go over to the piano, and I wasn't somebody who would want to necessarily learn a whole song by somebody else, but I wanted to learn what made it tick. So I started to find like the kind of chordings that Tony Banks, would use and start to make almost like rules in my head. Like I can play this minor chord over that root. And then actually all these other chords sound really cool over that root note too. And it makes that sound, that Genesis sound. And then one day, like somebody played me a little bit of Emerson stuff. I was like, whoa, okay, that's cool. All those fourths and suspended chords, like, and then went to the piano and I literally taught myself to put my hand on every fourth chord in every key. And I made up little patterns, so I had a sus4, a sus2, an all fourth chord. And I just got to a point where I could bang, put my hand in any one of them in any position really fast. So I brought it in as part of, let's say I was training the model, right, to do that style. Gentle Giant comes along. Like, what's that about? Like, Gentle Giant to me was like almost like Bach, meets rock. And there was all this counterpoint, but there was a lot of interesting syncopation that you don't find necessarily in, Bach's music, well, certainly, but in classical music. And I started to develop a style where I could improvise like that, or I could write music like that. So everything was like an independent model, much like what we're doing with my work at MIT, where I'm training it for this, I'm training it for that, and I'm training it for this. Now, where does it all go? Like, obviously, in my mind, I can sit down and you guys say, oh, play that style. I could do that. Or I could go and play like a different style and we could do that. But there's also the ability, due to my personal training, to change it and to morph between the styles and to make a smooth shift between them. And that's not something my AI can do yet. But people say, where is it going? What do you want it to do? Well, I'd love to be jamming with my Jambot, we call it, and be able to shift gears and have it be able to go, oh, if you're doing that, well, then I can do this. And if I all of a sudden shift in something more classical, it would go, oh, I can make that happen too. So my background has been all about allowing all these influences to come and come and help to create this like soup that's in my brain, of all these styles. Because as like a progressive rock musician, or I guess Dream Theater progressive metal, but a progressive musician, that's what it's all about for me. That's what I love. I don't play jazz. I don't play rock. I don't play any one thing. I kind of play with all this different vocabulary from all the different things that I've trained myself to do.
Yeah, well, I suppose you're playing music as you've absorbed it, and as you've said, you've trained the model into the soup that's in your brain. Just as a
Right.
follow-up question, Jordan, I'm really interested. So, obviously, you're at Juilliard and you're learning, but you're also having fun, spending time teaching your classmates some improvisation, some boogie woogie, some all sorts of stuff, and you said yourself you've absorbed so many influences. Was it just a natural progression then that you would eventually perform live and play out in bands and try different styles, or was there something specific that attracted you to that?
Well, I was really being trained to be a classical pianist. And up until about the time I was 17 or 18, I didn't think there was really going to be anything else, although I always did love to improvise on the side. But my training was so focused, so serious, and so good that that's kind of what I knew. That's, in every way, how I was trained to think and how I was trained to play. My technique is very much from this kind of amazing classical background of these teachers that had this amazing lineage from like Rosina Levine to my teacher, Catherine Parker. I was very lucky to have that. Um, but when I started to get exposed to this other music and to like things like the mini moog, or actually some high school students came over one day by surprise with a Moog Sonic 6, I think it was, just to my door and said, "Here, we want you to check this out." And so when I started to learn about that and the music, my mind started to kind of go off this way. And so what happened was, um, I was at the age now where I had to decide if I was going to go to the college level of Juilliard because I had been in the preparatory level. But to go to the college, you don't just go there, you have to re-audition like anybody. So I was kind of like, halfway out the door, feeling a little bit, but at the same time, there was so much invested in me for the classical thing that I auditioned for the classical thing. I got in and I got, excuse me, an even more high-powered teacher. Her name was Adele Marcus, this very like well-known teacher who taught all the emerging concert pianists. And so I spent about three-quarters of a year there with her. And then one day I was playing the Chopin G minor ballade, which I just heard on the way driving home from my friend's place, which was funny. Um, and I don't know, it's like a 30-page piece or something like that. And I got about halfway through playing it for her after being assigned to play it like a week ago. And I was playing it, and she came over halfway through and she took the book away from me. And I stopped, and she was like, "Why did you stop?" I said, "I stopped because I've only been playing this. This is my first week studying this piece. It's 30 pages. I don't know it by memory yet." And she was kind of like, "Well, when you study with Adele Marcus, you need to memorize everything the first week." So that was the tipping point. I was like, "You know what? I have a lot of other things on my mind right now. I don't really want to do this." So then I left, and it was a big deal because my parents didn't know what to think, what to do with me, or the teachers like, what? But a lot of things were the fact that I missed my teenage rebellion or didn't have one. Everything was waiting to kind of like come out. So it took a while for me to really fall into like any kind of let's say like a groove. I wasn't somebody who grew up playing in bands or anything like that. And when I left Juilliard, I was interested in all this music, but I was also told that I shouldn't talk to anybody who's playing blues and rock and jazz. Like they're not the high quality people like the classical people. And that only took me until, recently to realize that they were right. I'm kidding.
I believed you there for a minute.
Always right. Right. But anyway, no. So it did take a while to learn how to interface and to figure out what I wanted to do exactly, because I also had to start thinking about how I was going to make a living. So, but the good thing was I was always very, very one-sided. I always did my music, and nothing else got in the way. So, it didn't matter if I didn't have any money or what was going on. I'd be doing this no matter what. And so eventually, you know, it worked out. I mean, I've been in Dream Theater for 26
Mm.
years. Before that, Liquid Tension Experiment and the Dregs. And there were some very floaty years. I mean, I used to support myself by playing in hotels and restaurants and bars. And there was a time period when that was happening too. So all while I was figuring out how this was all really going to work.
E-
So,
Exactly. And look, there's one last question I want to ask you, Jordan, about those formative years and Julia, because we recently spoke with Kerry Minier from Gentle Giant. You mentioned Gentle Giant, and he talked
it's a
about
hero.
the influence of, again, that classical influence on his work going into the future, and for him particularly counterpoint and stuff like that. So what
Yeah.
were the key learnings, if it's possible to encapsulate them, that you took out of those years?
After I left Juilliard.
Yeah.
Well, I started out actually. I got really interested in electronic space music for a while. I mean, I was listening to the Prague thing is kind of what caught my ear and led me astray. But once I was astray, then I got into like Tangerine Dream and beyond. Like I was playing music that made Tangerine Dream look like they were playing Mozart or something for a little while. I liked like Phaedra or something like that, or Rubicon, or those albums were very influential, but my music was not quite as locked into pitch as that for a while. I would have one hand on the knobs of the Mini Moog, and the other hand playing the keys, and kind of like almost like a human sequencer. I was just like doing this weird FM synthesis and ring modulation and everything kind of as I was playing. So it was a whole thing, and that was very formative because I learned a lot about sound. As a matter of fact, in those days, I learned to play the Mini Moog before I knew anything about any of the technical names or what anything was. I didn't know what an oscillator was, or an LFO, or sawtooth waveforms. I didn't know. I really didn't know anything about it. But I knew every knob, every combination of knobs, everything it would do, how to get any sound that the thing could make. I just knew. It was just really organic. It wasn't until years later that I kind of filled in the blanks and, met people that kind of showed me, oh, this is, these are the waveforms, and, this is oscillator modulation, and this is what this means. And I was like, oh, and it was good timing because you had to know what all those things meant when digital came around and they got rid of all the knobs. And all of a sudden you're like looking at a tiny little screen and it's like, you don't know what the hell's going on unless you know a little bit about it. So it was good that they filled in those blanks. So that was like the synthesizer, the sound part of it that was really important to me. And then it was then it was the music that I heard, all the different things. Probably my favorite, like Prog things, which I've kind of mentioned, like Genesis and Gentle Giant and, Yes, and King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. All these things were big learning, processes for me that were really important, that kind of filled in who I am.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we got you. You may get a little bit of whiplash, Jordan. We're going to jump around all sorts of time frames here, but I actually want to talk about your last 12 months. It's been a busy 12 months as always for you. But just tell us about what's been going. I mean, Dream Theater has this new amazing album out, Parasomnia. There's all sorts of other stuff. Just tell us about your last 12 months and what you've been up to.
Yeah. So you guys probably know I released a solo album called Permission to Fly.
Yes.
And that literally, I kind of finished working on that right when I was starting up with with the recording of the new Dream Theater album, Parasomnia. And right from there, we went, basically into touring mode. So I'm kind of like in the middle of a touring cycle, which over the last period of time, I don't know exactly how many months, but months, we've been to Europe, we toured North America, South America. So it's been a whole lot of touring going on. And of course, the big news in our camp was that our drummer came back after 13 years of being away, Mike Portnoy. And that kind of like was really exciting for us in so many levels, getting an old friend back and getting somebody who was just like, who basically, created Dream Theater back in the day with Petrucci and Mayung. And so that kind of gave us all this kind of big energy to make this, I think, was a very cool album, and then to hit the road in style with a really big production. Probably the biggest production we've ever done. Definitely the biggest production we've ever done, actually, and cover a lot of ground. And now I'm off for a little while longer, a few more weeks, and then we're going to hit the road and we're going to come to Europe and do a whole bunch of festivals and some headline shows, and then continue on from there, really, with the Parasomnia tour, which will be, pretty fun.
And how's the response been to the Parasomnia content, Jordan? I mean, it's an amazing album. I've listened to it a number of times, but what's the response been like so far?
So live, we've only played two of the songs, Night Terror and Midnight Messiah. And they're really, really fun to play live. You don't know until you do it, but they have a lot of power. There's a lot of energy in those songs, and you can feel it. It's very tangible. Um, so that's what I've experienced live as far as feedback from people. Other than that, I mean, just like the album has been very well received, which is so exciting. It's really a great time for Dream Theater. And it's really unusual because think about it. We were just out there celebrating the 40-year anniversary. Again, I've been with them for 26, but 40 years since the guys met at Berkeley, basically. This celebrates like the day they met, I think in the Berkeley halls or something, that kind of thing. So, um, but it's been incredible, to have after 40 years to have a band be kind of like have like one of the best, if not the best run or the best year of our careers. So we're just doing it, enjoying it, and kind of trying to take it in at the same point. So yeah.
Dream Theater's been, as you said, Jordan, such an enduring and successful band, and it's seems to be going from strength to strength still. And you mentioned that the joy and delight at Mike Portnoy, your drummer, coming back to the band after a break, which leads me to a question I'm fascinated to ask you. And this is something that I'll educate our listeners and viewers on who may not be aware of this. Some certainly will. When Mike originally decided to take a break from the band, you all did something quite unusual, which is you auditioned drummers, but made that also part of an online YouTube documentary series where we get to see
Right.
various drummers auditioning with Dream Theater. And your role in that was really, really prominent and interesting in the sense of coming up with some different licks for the drummers that had never heard before to try and play over, and they were pretty tricky, odd-metered things.
Sure.
I'm just curious as to, from your perspective, how involved were you in deciding that would be something that you would do as a team, and how did that feel from your perspective going through that process?
Well, when Mike left originally, it was very emotional. It was really sad. Personally, I was like kind of devastated that we lost our drummer. I didn't know where it was going to go. And, he and I were very close and, we really kind of close throughout the whole thing though. But, so, but when the idea came up to do this kind of like audition process, we all thought, wow, this is really pretty cool. This is fun. And it struck us that every great drummer out there wanted to like audition for us. So it was kind of like it made us feel a lot better because at first we weren't feeling very good at all.
Well,
But we were
you
thinking,
had some
wow,
amazing drummers put their hand up to be a
incredible.
part of Dream Theater. Yeah.
Incredible. I mean, it was one of the experiences in my life that was just really memorable and powerful and educational. And just meeting all those guys was a great thing because everybody we had come in was really cool and really good. So in a way, it was a hard decision. In another way, it wasn't that hard a decision because, Dream Theater musically and personally and in our particular life style or band style, we needed somebody to fit a certain kind of a mold, if you will, and do the job. So it wasn't just musical, it was personal, it was business. It was all the different factors, kind of a big thing. So, but it was great to have everybody come in, and I had a lot of fun, like preparing, as you said, preparing like what are we gonna throw them? We got to see if they can handle like some really progressive stuff, and just see everybody's different way of doing it. Like some people were just more like vibing and then trying to do it off a vibe. Other people were maybe vibing, but could like pick up the rhythmic subtleties of it. Other people wanted to write some things down before they tried it out. It's just the way that people work. Um, like Mike Mangini came in and I think he came in the morning at some point and he played like we just could have been on the stage. He just played the songs. It was like he was hitting hard. He just nailed it. It was incredible. And it was unavoidable to like just go, wow, holy shit, that's amazing you know. And not to say the other guys weren't amazing too. I mean, one of my very favorite drummers on the planet Earth is Marco Miniman. I just love that guy. I love his musicality. He and I have worked together a lot in the past and will work together in the future. I think he's just an incredibly musical, drummer. But again, like I said, there was a lot of factors that go into who's going to be the drummer in Dream Theater. Like it's, not just who's the best at whatever. So, but yeah, and we had 13 really good years with Mangini, and I learned so much from playing with other musicians, and I learned so much from Mike Mangini, because he's just such an interesting character. And even thinking about how did you like I would ask him, how did you prepare for that audition? Like, what the hell? You came in and you killed it. You nailed it. And he was like, oh, well, I played in the dark. I put water on my hands. I reversed my drums around. I prepared for any disaster, and I practiced hard, and I came in and I was ready. I was like, well, okay, whatever it is you're doing, that's pretty cool. So,
That's
yeah,
amazing. And,
yeah.
and and for this tour, with Mike rejoining in this current tour, what was the rehearsal process in the lead up to the current tour?
We generally do a lot of work on our own, just kind of like learning all the songs. So when we come in, we all kind of know them. And then we're working on the finer details or the hard parts when we're together. Things change when you're together. You're not just jamming to a record. It's always, oh, wow, I didn't realize you were going to do that. Can you play that again so I can lock it in or whatever? And this stuff. So we'll get together. I think we got together for maybe couple of weeks, to bang stuff around and figure out everything we needed to kind of do to make sure we could, play through the songs. And then of course you're going to be on a stage, so there's a lot of production. So at one point we transferred to a production facility that we could set up our PA and all our lights. And that was really important too. That was in the UK, at the beginning of this whole thing. And then that's a different kind of rehearsal. Then we're figuring out when to walk on stage, when to walk off stage, what's going on, so, but like for this next run, we'll get together. We're going to be adding some new songs to the set and changing things up a bit. But we need to be together to do that. So we're going to spend a week or so rehearsing, and then a couple of production rehearsals again when we get over to Europe, and that'll be that.
Great. And I do need to ask, even though the vast majority of our audience, Jordan, is outside of Australia, when are we likely to see Dream Theater or yourself in Australia next?
Yeah, I know we haven't been there in a little while, but we were talking about doing the Asian Australian thing. God, I know that the first run after the summer is in the US, and I think, if I remember correctly, it's kind of like after that.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say,
No.
I don't know exactly, but we are planning to get there. So,
Great.
and looking forward to it as well.
No,
Yeah,
that's
we'll be
great. Jordan, we've got some pretty disparate sort of individual scenario questions to fire at you, and we've also got some listener and viewer questions further down as well. And one of them was, obviously, whether it's with Dream Theater or in other spheres, you've demonstrated your ability to not only play standing in front of a keyboard, but also playing upside down, for example. What sort of practice and work did you need to be able to do to be able to get your head around essentially everything in reverse?
Are you talking about like when I do move the stand
Well,
around?
that too.
Or
I believe that there's the odd situation where you've literally played from the other side of the keyboard. I could be wrong.
no, I don't. That's not one of my tricks.
I think what David's referring to there is you all famously did in Dream Theater, and you can give me some background on this, Jordan. I believe it was
Sure.
somewhat of a surprise for an audience. You did the whole of Dark Side of the Moon from start to finish, and I believe you played part of Any Color You Like standing on the from behind the keyboard, is like where the plugs and things go in at the back, and you're still playing the solos. And we're curious how
Oh,
you're able to do that
maybe.
mentally, because if I look at
Well,
the
I don't.
keyboard from that angle, my F's become B's, and I couldn't do that. So I was
Yeah,
curious as
that's
to how.
funny. Well, let me just admit that I don't totally remember that, but I'd like to see it on video. There probably is one. But if you're telling me I did that, then I did that. Okay, I'll go with that, guys. But you know what? But I can speak to that kind of thing pretty well because, like, one of my hobbies over the last few years has been seriously getting into the guitar, right? And one of the things that I do with it, because I kind of like enjoy the way it feels to my brain, is like, how can I play the guitar at the same time as the keyboard and maybe play in harmony and do things like that? So I like those kind of challenges where you kind of like shake it up, where you approach something from a different angle and you have to kind of like just figure out the mechanics of it and whatever has to click, or you have to let go of some kind of hold in your brain to make it work. Like sometimes people will say when I'll do something along those lines, they'll say, "What do you have like two brains or what is it?" And I feel like, you know what? The only way I can do this is it's almost the opposite of what I think people think. It's not like I'm like almost like clenching up and just going super academic and doing this thing. It's almost like this letting go process that allows me to do weird stuff like that. It's really different than what anybody can imagine to be able to, if I mean for people who try like playing the guitar and the keyboard at the same time in harmony or whatever, they would kind of know what I mean. At a certain point you just go, you know what? This is not like, you figure out what you figure out, but then you got to let go to be able to make it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. And I
Sure.
think it'll give us permission to look at you and go, wow, this guy's pretty special. Jordan, on a similar sort of a question around yourself personally and the way you play, again, seeing your incredible dexterity, you have a lot of strength and a lot of power in your fingers. You can play quite quickly but quite accurately. And again, for example, for listeners or viewers who may not have seen this, Jordan can do things like play Pink Floyd's On the Run, which was done famously on a sequencer. Well, Jordan can play that freehand. And I'm curious as to where that dexterity comes from. Is it a practice routine? Obviously, you mentioned you had some really good, strong classical training as a young
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
What enables you to have that level of control over a keyboard?
That's a good question because um there's the classical training, certainly, and there's some classical pianists, I should say, that do stuff that at this point in my life, or maybe ever, that it would just be so hard. But I can do other things. I can do other things that maybe they wouldn't be that apt to just sit down and do. Are things like, well, let me describe it this way. So I have a really great classical training. We established that. I never became a concert pianist because I shifted gears. If I had gone that route, I probably would have gotten in better in some certain levels, right? Certain kinds of things. But what I did do is by going into the technology, the rock space, I discovered things like sequencers. And I remember when I first started to work with the sequencers that I was blown away by the kind of like accuracy you could get by putting in the notes and then quantizing them and then speeding them up. When I heard like an on the run kind of thing, or just like the sound of a sequencer playing really rapid notes, I was really like turned on by that. I was inspired. And the way that I kind of absorb things like that is I don't let it kind of like bring me down. I think, oh man, I could do that. Like I could do that with my hand. And so when I started to play like the mini moog and like all the kind of like Tangerine Dreamish kind of stuff, which is very, I used to call it almost like notey note music because it was like all these things that was kind of robotic, whatever. But I realized I could play the repeating patterns with my fingers and keep that going and then modify it whenever I wanted to. Much more control in a way than a sequencer because I'm in real time, I'm deciding on the notes and playing them much like a sequencer, looking for that kind of sound. So it was kind of like my desire to play like a sequencer from a certain point of view that I think really helped my technique in a way that made it kind of an interesting, maybe even slightly unique kind of a technique. I remember running into what's his name from Motley Crue, Tommy Lee, the drummer. Well, I was at some kind of a music like convention thing. It wasn't NAM, it was like a smaller thing. And he came into the room and I was doing something. And he said, "Man," he says, "your fingers are like little machine guns." I'm like, "Oh man, that's funny." Kind of stayed with me because he saw there was, there's some power there. Because I really worked on one of the things that I really work on is, well, two major things. One is my finger independence, right? So from a classical point of view, you're talking about things like the Phillips exercises or something like that, where you're holding down all your fingers and you're lifting up some without the others, or like, this, that kind of thing, where each finger is kind of like its own entity and they're all strong. And then the other thing I would work on is just kind of like just the power of the fingers. And years ago I developed all these like kind of rhythm. I call them like rhythmic displacement exercises, where you might take like a series of four notes, like da 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 da, but you might accent them in like five, like a in groupings of five. So you keep the four notes. So if you got da 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 da, which you think would be in four, what happens if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, and then it kind of gives each finger this special meaning because you're going to be accenting that finger as you go, or to do it in seven, which also throws it off. So every time you repeat the pattern of four notes in seven, it's going to accent the next note. It's cool stuff. Then I apply that to my guitar playing too, which is really good because it coordinates my brain and fingers in another way. But all those kind of things that's coming very much from a progressive musician's mindset to think about. I'm playing a four note sequence, but I'm putting it in seven, or I'm putting it in five. That I think I could only get to by being into the kind of music that I'm into, and then applying it to my technique. So
I'm,
I think that's how I got here.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a really informative answer, and some really cool ideas for people who might want to try improving their finger strength and their way of
Yeah.
thinking about how each finger works independently. So thank you, Jordan.
Sure.